I am happy to have joining me this morning from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. I've known him for a number of years. He's an attorney with the good guys and defending our freedoms and liberties throughout Wisconsin and beyond. Attorney Lucas Weber, how are you?
Hey, good morning, Meg. Doing great. Beautiful weather out here today.
Yeah, and I suppose you're down, in the Milwaukee area, right?
Yeah, yep.
So
it was gorgeous all weekend, and the sun is still shining, and seems to be a good week weather-wise for our state. Spring is in the air.
It seems as if we've gotten a reprieve from winter, and I hope it continues, right?
Yeah, certainly love winter and all it offers, but once the time comes, it's always good to get out of it.
Well, and speaking of reprieves, I don't know if we were chatting off air, and based on what you and I have learned, the ROFR bill, right of first refusal, evidently still has a heartbeat, and wanted to get your take on. I know that Will put out a statement, and I believe your, I think he's policy guy, Kyle, testified at the ROFR hearing. And but wanted to get Will's perspective, and just based on what you have observed. I've had conversations off air. I will have tomorrow a Republican Senator, Corey Tomczyk, here in the 29th. He's going to be joining me on the show tomorrow. He's in support of ROFR. I know I've just outed him, but I think he's he's made it pretty clear that he's in support of it. And so it'll be interesting to have the point-counterpoint, obviously not on the same day, but just what is it about ROFR that stinks to high heaven for you?
Yeah, so our opposition is twofold. First, the law itself is unconstitutional. Courts have taken up these laws in other states, Texas, Indiana, Iowa. They've been declared unconstitutional because government doesn't have the authority to do what this law does. And the second reason we oppose it is just it's bad policy. ROFR drives up electric rates, despite the fact that the supporters of ROFR somehow are now arguing it will save money. Anybody who looks at the bill understands that just belies common sense. And that has to do with how energy markets here in Wisconsin actually work. So wherever you are in the state, you have an electric utility that serves you. It might be a large corporation, it might be a municipal utility or a co-op, but there's only one that serves you. That utility has a state-guaranteed monopoly to give you power, and you have to purchase your power only from them. You have no choice. In exchange for that state-guaranteed monopoly, those utilities are subject to regulation by the state. So every dollar of rate that goes in, they're guaranteed to make around 10 cents in profit off of it under state law, and in exchange for that, the rates are heavily regulated by the state. What the ROFR law says is that when they're building infrastructure projects, transmission projects in Wisconsin, they don't have to go to competitive bidding. Those in-state utilities, if it's in their territory, get what's called the right of first refusal. So if they're going to build a new project, they just get to say off the front end, yeah, we'll build this, we'll make the money off of it, no problem, and then they can build it. As opposed to how we do most every other government project, which is through competitive bidding, where the government lets the project out, a number of contractors come in and say, hey, I could do it for $100, I could do it for $90, I could do it for $85. Then you go with the lowest bidder who can handle it. The ROFR law gets rid of the competitive bidding process altogether and just favors those in-state companies. And as I said, that's unconstitutional, and it'll just drive up our electric rates, which are already some of the highest in the Midwest and the highest in the country.
Okay, so I was actually, I do write by hand. I don't always use a computer, and I was furiously scribbling notes to respond, because some of the arguments in favor of ROFR that I've heard, and you mentioned monopoly, there is already, as justification, I guess, for ROFR, is there is already a monopoly in that we don't have a choice as to who provides us with our utilities. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, correct. I mean, state law has that in place. I mean, that's a policy choice that the state made years ago. It's not a policy choice that we necessarily have to stick with. Wisconsin could always deregulate our energy markets and open up our utilities to the free market like other states have done. But yeah, I mean, that is how the Wisconsin energy market works right now. You don't have a choice of who you buy your power from. But that doesn't mean that it goes that they should also have a monopoly over the transmissions and how this infrastructure projects get built. What we've seen in these projects, and study after study has shown, that having a ROFR law in place will drive up the cost of having these projects, which in turn comes back to us as ratepayers, just driving up our energy rates. time and time again.
Okay, and I don't know how all of a sudden this is a point counterpoint, and now I'm debating an attorney because I really like you, Lucas. But just some of the arguments that I've heard, and I share this with you off air too, is that I received a call, and I take calls from our listeners from time to time, and last week, and the gentleman had indicated that he was a representative or was calling to make the case for Wisconsin Electrical Co-op Administration. I think that's what WECA was what I think I remember him saying. And he talked about how the co-ops, at least in our district, and that's why I'm gonna have Senator Tomczyk on, because he's had conversations with those that are providing the utilities in our district, in the 29th Senate District. And he has said that, and I mean, he hasn't said this, but this caller said that the co-ops are nonprofit. And so there's not, I mean, I don't know if money is the incentive as much as it is control over a Wisconsin provider being in the conversation, or, I guess it's more than the conversation because they are given rights of first refusal. But how do you respond to, I guess a comment like that about, well, the co-ops are nonprofit, at least in our district?
Yeah, they're nonprofit, but they still obviously charge ratepayers. And the vast majority of Wisconsinites are serviced by for-profit corporate utilities. And those are the large utilities that are going to be running the massive infrastructure projects. The billion-dollar projects that are going to be being built all around the state that are no longer going to be competitive bid if the ROFR bill passes. And I think the best analogy here would be if let's say you had to hire an electrician to come rewire your home. That's going to be an expensive project. Imagine if there was just one electric company in your town that had a guaranteed monopoly, and they had the right of first refusal if they were going to do your job or not. And you just had to call them, and they said, yeah, we'll do that job. Sure, we'll send somebody out. You just had to pay whatever bill they charged you. That's what the world would work under ROFR. As opposed to right now, anybody, any one of us who had a project like that would probably call and get multiple quotes from multiple electricians, and you'd go with whoever the cheapest one was, or maybe not the cheapest, but the lowest cost, or, you'd factor in any number of factors that you'd want to go with to save money. You're not just going to go with and blindly follow whoever has a monopoly in your area, right? And I think, the same is true for these large projects. The competitive bidding process drives costs down because you force companies to compete with each other, and that's a good thing for us as ratepayers.
Okay, so I'm curious, because you talked about at the very beginning, that was your first point, is that this ROFR law is unconstitutional and likely, and I've always said this about the profession, your profession, I couldn't have cut it, Lucas, because I'm such an impatient person, and if it often takes a long time to have to file a lawsuit and get it scheduled and go before a judge. But in the states, and I'm not, I think I've read different things about this, but there are other states in America that have passed ROFR laws, and are there states that have had them repealed because they were found unconstitutional?
Yeah, there are. Federal courts and state courts have found ROFR laws to be unconstitutional and have struck them down. ROFR laws in Texas, Indiana, Iowa, just off the top of my head, have been struck down, and Wisconsin's law will too. And that's because the Constitution prohibits one state from favoring its citizens in this manner over those of another state. So, for example, you can't say any in-state incumbent utility, which is what we have in this bill, gets an advantage over any other utility who doesn't have a presence in the state. That's what makes the law unconstitutional. Government doesn't have the ability to make that choice. And so, that's how those laws have been challenged and struck down elsewhere.
Okay, so presumably you just named Texas, Indiana, Iowa, Republican. So I would suppose at one time the Republican majority legislature passed this, and now it has been struck down. So what is it about ROFR that's making this even an issue in Wisconsin? I mean, what is it about why? I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it, why are Republicans supporting it? I mean, what gives, in your opinion?
I mean, I think there's, ROFR isn't necessarily Republican law or Democrat law. I mean, it's a law that is being pushed by utility companies that have a lot of lobbyists that are getting paid a lot of money to go out and push this bill. I mean, there's an army of lobbyists in Madison who are in the ears of legislators every day, telling them that this is the greatest bill since sliced bread and that they should pass it. And it's what we're up against in opposing this legislation. But the good news is we've got facts and common sense on our side. I think most people understand the competitive bidding process and how that benefits the public at large. As I said, we do it in our own lives when we have a project at our home. We expect government to do it because we know that saves money. And when a monopoly utility is telling you that you don't need competitive bidding, you should just give us the project, the right to refuse any project. Everybody should be very, very suspicious of that. And that message does get out. The more we talk to people, we see more and more legislators coming out against the proposal, which is really great to see. And hopefully we have reached that critical mass soon where this bill can just go back into the shadows where it belongs.
Okay, so I think that I've told you, or you might be aware of this, maybe you don't remember. I don't like to remind our listeners of this, but I originated from the state of Minnesota. And I know I read that in 2012, Minnesota was considering its own ROFR law. As far as I know, it never passed. And at the time, ATC, which is the American Transmission Company, was opposed to the Minnesota ROFR law. Now they've done an about-face and are in favor of it here in Wisconsin. What do you attribute that to?
I'm not familiar with the specifics of that, although, if they were a Wisconsin company and the ROFR law in Minnesota wouldn't have helped them, I guess it would make sense that they would oppose it. But again, I preface that by just saying I don't know the facts of that law or kind of more of the background on it, so I don't want to make any broad assumptions there, but it could have just been, I'm sure, like all of us, they would just make a decision based on what's best for them, and I'm guessing the law probably didn't help them at the time, and this law would. So. Well,
and that's what it appears, because I have this letter that was written in 2012 to the Minnesota Senate Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications Committee from the American Transmission Company, and they own, operate, build, and maintain high-voltage transmission lines serving portions of Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, and Illinois. And so at the time, they stated that this legislation would stifle competition in the development and construction of electric transmission facilities, leading to higher costs for electricity users in Minnesota. So it seems as if they've changed their tune, and I guess I'm curious about why they would have. In 10, 12 years' time?
Yeah, I think the only answer, the obvious answer, is just that the ROFR law here being proposed in Wisconsin would benefit them, right? They would be the ones who would benefit from those higher costs. They get the money, they would get those projects, and they're the ones who would benefit from nobody could compete with them, as opposed to them being the ones being pushed out of competition. So, the answer at the end of the day is, hey, maybe these in-state utilities would be the best option for these projects, but the way we find that out is through a competitive bidding process, and who can do the process in the most cost-effective manner to get the project done safely and completely. And that's why it's in place, and that's why we need to keep it in place. And if we get rid of that, all it's going to do is drive up our costs, and we're going to be paying more and more and more on our electric bills, which already go up every year and are some of the highest in the Midwest and highest in the country. And we need to start going the other way.
So is there under any circumstances would, and I know, I believe you're appearing on behalf of Will. So would Will support ROFR legislation? I mean, I've also read too that only union labor would be given preferential treatment in Wisconsin too if this were to pass.
Yeah, I mean, our organization, we have a mission that we follow. Our mission is to advance the public interest in the rule of law, constitutional government, and part of that is supporting free markets. Free markets support our democratic society. We need to keep the markets as free as possible, and legislation like ROFR is just antithetical to that. Whenever government is giving one person an unqualified guarantee to get work, I mean, it's a recipe for disaster, and we need to be very weary of that. And I just would implore anybody listening, whenever someone who has been guaranteed a monopoly by the state tells you that they should have even less competition than they already have, you should be very suspicious of the motives and look into it. And in this case, it's something that everybody should oppose.
So I guess I'll press you on this. I mean, in your opinion, what is it that is motivating Republicans to be anti-free market? I mean, to set that aside. I mean, to set aside their principles.
I don't know, and I mean, certainly there are, there's people in both parties supporting legislation, and there are certainly I've seen a number of lawmakers come out against the bill too. So again, I know there are a lot of lobbyists who are supporting this legislation in Madison, who are working overtime to try to get this passed as quickly as they can. And it's just, unfortunate that some of the misinformation out there and misunderstanding out there based on how our electrical markets in Wisconsin work and what the impact is of getting rid of a competitive bidding process. It's just, I think it's just an education on our end. The more we're able to talk to people, like I said, the more lawmakers are coming out against it. So we just need to get our message out and right some of the misinformation that's out there.
Well, thank you, Lucas Weber, for joining me this morning. I appreciate it. I didn't anticipate that I was going to be the devil's advocate, but I mean, it's as I learn more and I realize how complicated this issue is, and then and evidently that I guess explains why there is so much contention between Republicans. It's just unfortunate that it's occurring at this time when we have a significant election coming up in just a few weeks.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the program today.
Yeah, well, thanks, Lucas. I appreciate it. From Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, you can go out to their website, will-law.org.